Okay, just a guide to indirect questions as a bit of a companion to explain the topic. So you have your notes, but I just thought I'd give an additional visual explanation of it for those who might not have quite got their head around it the first time. Though it does take time and practice. Just here's just another way to explain things. So indirect questions, as I said, indirect speech is descriptions of speech. So we had indirect commands beforehand, and that was, say, for example, the teacher says work in quotation marks. But indirect is when you say, for example, the teacher ordered the students to work. So it's like you are explaining a speech bubble to someone without directly saying a quote. So indirect questions are doing that, except just doing the same to questions. So you are explaining a question and taking away the quote marks. So unlike indirect commands, indirect questions have a few differences, but a few similarities as well. So this is just to show you the what is different, but also building off what you should already know. So the first thing is it uses sequence of tense. So sequence of tense rules are those where the main verb, so this is now converting the quote into an explanation of that quote, where the main verb influences the second verb in the sentence, the subjunctive verb. So I'll show you examples of that. So you've been used to seeing just the choice being between present tense and imperfect tense. So present subjunctive may, that's the diamond, just as a reminder for everyone, and imperfect is might. So which is generally the second principal part of the verb plus your most, must, isn't ending. And yeah, so you generally use, so you have to just remember one rule and one main exception. So generally if the main verb, the first verb is past tense, the subjunctive is going to be imperfect might. So the one form from the second PP. And if the main verb is not past, the subjunctive is going to be may. So the one formed by the diamond. And the only past tense, which is an exception, is perfect plus have. So I've spoken about this plenty of times before, where the reason why perfect plus have is treated differently from other past tenses is because it's a past action, but unlike all the others, it's not a completed action. So if you say, for example, I loved her once, you loved her in the past, but you don't love her anymore. But if you say, I have loved her for many years, you loved her 10 years ago, you loved her 5 years ago, but you still love her. So that's treated differently because it straddles both past and present, unlike other past tenses. So may and might is still an option, a choice, but it is only when you are describing a question in the present tense, such as what you see on the screen. What are you doing? So you can describe this sentence using not past tense main verbs and past tense main verbs. So see how you can say, I ask. So see, that's present tense, what you are doing. So literally it's, I ask what you may do. But then if you change the verb before the word what, so change the tense of that, the afterwards, the second verb changes tense as well. So you change the indicative to a past tense and the subjunctive changes. So that's what sequence of tense is. So if you choose to explain it, but with a past tense verb, it would be, I asked what you were doing. So the top one uses present subjunctive may, and the bottom one uses imperfect subjunctive might. But yeah, a lot of the time you can just translate it as are or were, or if it's I am, and I am, and I what I am doing, what I was doing, yeah. And yeah, so just am, yeah, and is and was, yes. Okay. So you can just translate it as if it's indicative, but remember that second verb is subjunctive. So really you're saying you may do and you might do. So one other difference with indirect questions is that the may and the might, present imperfect, is only one of three possible options. Why are there three options? It's because you can describe questions or explain questions of different tenses. So present and imperfect is only a choice when you are describing a question in the present tense. So let's have a look at a question in the past tense. So where have you been? So again, you can explain that using a past tense main verb or a non-past tense main verb. So look at a non-past tense main verb. You can say, let's just use a different one. So the future tense, I will ask where you have been. But then you can use a past tense verb for the first one, the indicative. And you'd say, I had asked, and see how it changes again, where you had been. So because you are describing now a direct question which was in the past tense, the choice isn't between present imperfect subjunctive, it's between perfect subjunctive, so you have been, and pluperfect subjunctive, you had been. So those two are ones. So just to go back to, you encountered these first of all in say cum clauses or C clauses. So if you have been good, if you had done this, you would have done this. So yeah, so they're the ones that take the perfect stem, and so perfect subjunctive is exactly the same as the future perfect, except it's erim, eris, erit, erimus, eritis, erint, and the pluperfect takes the perfect stem of a verb as well, but then its ending is isem, ises, iset. So that is indirect questions for when you are explaining a question in the past tense. Now, so you have, if you're describing a question in the present tense, the choice is between present imperfect subjunctive. If you are explaining a question in the past tense, the choice is between perfect, pluperfect, subjunctive. So what about a question in the future tense? For example, when will you go? Now there is no, as we had in our notes, there's no future subjunctive as such, but it's just a convenient name for the second verb, or the second verb you have to use. So what could be considered subjunctive when you are describing a question in the future tense. So for example, when will you go? So let's have a look at that explained. So I'm taking away the quote marks and I'm using a non-past tense main verb. So what's called primary sequence. So, and here, just to show you that exception, I've used perfect plus have. So I have asked when you will go. However, let's see what we do when we use a past tense verb. It becomes I was asking, so another past tense is imperfect, was we're used to. I was asking when you would go. So with non-past tense main verbs and past tense main verbs, the choice is between is and was for a present tense direct question, or could be is, am or was, or could be were, are or were. It's just had and have, has, or had for past tense, so perfect, pluperfect, subjunctive. And it is will and would for when you are explaining or making indirect a direct question, so a question in quote marks, which is in the future tense. So the future subjunctive is the future active participle, so the urus word, plus plus the present, just the present and the imperfect subjunctive of the verb to be. So say, for example, if you want to say you will go, it's literally you may be about to go. So it's two words. So in this case, it will be iturus sim. And when you would go is literally saying when you might be about to go. So the difference will be you still have iturus, but it'll be iturus sm. But will and would are just much more convenient ways to say them. So the last difference between the subjunctive constructions you've seen, such as purpose clause and indirect commands and indirect questions, is that clearly the word which joins the two clauses is not ut or nay. So, but what is easy about it is that it's just the question word, but it's become a conjunction. So if you say, I have asked when you will go, the word when is still quando. Or to go backwards, where, it's still ubi. And the word what, it's still quid. So all I have done is I've taken it out of the quote marks and I've taken away the question mark, because you are not directly quoting it, you are indirectly quoting it. So that is the end of this little companion for indirect questions, just for anyone who may have struggled to understand the concept the first time, and just a more permanent resource for you all online as well. Bye.